Somewhere on this planet, more than 100,000 years before anyone invented a word for it, a human being sat next to a fire and breathed in something they were never supposed to breathe. Not by accident, not just smoke drifting into their face because the wind shifted the wrong way, on purpose. And whatever happened in their brain in that moment was strong enough, strange enough, good enough, that they wanted to do it again. That single decision, repeated by countless people across thousands of generations, may be the real starting point of one of the oldest habits our species has ever carried. Not cigarettes, not vape pens, not the tobacco industry with its billboards and lawsuits, just smoke, lungs, and a nervous system that responded in a way our ancestors couldn't ignore. So here's the actual question. When did humans first start smoking on purpose, and how far back does this habit really go? The answer starts, oddly enough, with something that has nothing to do with smoking at all. It starts with fire itself. Our relationship with fire goes back a staggering amount of time. At a site called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found burned bone and ash that shows controlled fire use going back roughly 1 million years. 1 million. That's not modern humans, that's Homo erectus, a completely different branch of our family tree with a smaller brain and a much rougher life. But they had fire. They sat by it. They cooked with it. And every single time they did, they were breathing in smoke, whether they liked it or not. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was just background noise in human life. Smoke was unavoidable. It filled caves, hung in the air of shelters, clung to skin and hair. Nobody was thinking about lung health. Nobody had a choice. But smoke isn't just smoke. Depending on what's actually burning, you get different chemical compounds released into the air. Some plants, when they burn, release substances that interact directly with the human brain. And here's the detail that makes this so interesting. Our brains are already built to respond to some of these plant chemicals. We have an entire internal system called the endocannabinoid system that reacts to certain plant chemicals almost like it was waiting for them. So when early humans accidentally sat downwind of the wrong plant while it burned, their brain didn't get confused, it got interested. Imagine that. No plan, no ritual, just a tired group of early humans sitting by a fire, breathing in something that happened to feel unexpectedly good. That could be the actual origin point of smoking. Not a discovery someone made in a lab, but a pleasant accident that kept repeating until somebody decided to make it happen on purpose. Now here's where we need to slow down, because there's a difference between humans accidentally smoking something and humans deliberately choosing to smoke something. The second one is much harder to prove, and that's exactly why the real evidence is so fascinating. The oldest confirmed case of intentional ritual smoking comes from the Pamir Mountains in Central Asia, from a burial site dated to around 500 BCE. Inside, archaeologists found wooden burners containing stones that had clearly been heated to very high temperatures, sitting next to the residue of cannabis plants with unusually high potency. This wasn't wild hemp used for rope. This was specifically chosen, specifically burned, and placed in a grave on purpose. That's about 2,500 years ago. But here's the twist that should stick with you. Just because the oldest confirmed evidence is 2,500 years old doesn't mean that's when it actually started. It just means that's the oldest evidence that happened to survive. Think about what actually lasts in the ground for thousands of years. Stone tools survive because stone barely breaks down. Bones, sometimes. But a wooden pipe? A handful of dried leaves? A woven pouch full of plant material? Those rot away within a few centuries under normal conditions. So the absence of older evidence doesn't prove people weren't smoking earlier. It just proves the proof didn't survive. This is where the ancient Greek historian Herodotus becomes surprisingly useful. Writing in the 5th century BCE, he described a nomadic group called the Scythians doing something that sounded almost unbelievable at the time.
He said they built small enclosed tents, heated stones until they glowed, and threw hemp seeds directly onto those stones. Then they sat inside, breathing in the smoke, and according to Herodotus, they were howling with pleasure. For a long time, historians assumed he was exaggerating or maybe misunderstanding some kind of cleansing ritual. Then, archaeologists actually dug into Scythian burial mounds, and what did they find? Bronze braziers, heated stones, hemp residue, exactly what Herodotus described more than 2,000 years ago, with nothing to make up and no reason to lie. So by the time recorded history even begins, in multiple regions across the world, people were already deep into the practice of deliberately inhaling smoke, not stumbling into it, choosing it, refining it, building rituals and tools around it. And that raises the real question this script is built around. If people were this advanced in their smoking rituals by 500 BCE, what were people doing thousands of years ago, long before anyone was writing anything at all?
To answer that, we have to leave Central Asia and travel all the way to a wild tobacco species most people have never heard of, and a place most people wouldn't expect: Utah, the desert, 12,000 years ago. In 2019, researchers digging at a site near the Great Salt Lake Desert found something that quietly rewrote part of this story. They uncovered an ancient hearth, a fire pit used for cooking and warmth, containing the seeds of Nicotiana attenuata, a species of wild tobacco native to North America. And these weren't seeds that had blown into the fire by accident. Their concentration and placement suggested something much more deliberate. Someone put them there, on purpose. This site is roughly 12,000 years old. That's thousands of years before any pottery, any pipe, any tool we normally associate with smoking existed in that region, which means the desire to burn a plant and breathe in its smoke came before the technology to make it convenient. People weren't waiting for the right tools. They were already doing it with whatever they had. And this is where the story stops being about one plant in one place and starts becoming something much bigger. Because 12,000 years ago, humans weren't only in Utah. They were spread across almost the entire planet: Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia. Every one of those regions had its own local plants, its own fires, its own opportunities for someone to notice, hey, this smoke feels different. So here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If people in North America were intentionally burning tobacco 12,000 years ago, is it really such a stretch to think people elsewhere were doing something similar with whatever grew near them? This idea has an actual name in anthropology. It's called the intoxication hypothesis, and the person most associated with it is a psychopharmacologist named Ronald Siegel, who worked at UCLA. His argument back in the 1980s was bold. He proposed that the drive to alter your own consciousness isn't some weird cultural quirk that only humans have. He argued it's closer to a biological drive, sitting right alongside hunger, thirst, and reproduction. And the evidence for this isn't just human. Elephants have been observed deliberately seeking out fermented marula fruit until they're visibly intoxicated. Reindeer in Siberia eat a mushroom called Amanita muscaria, which has psychoactive effects, and then, and this part is genuinely wild, other reindeer drink the urine of the reindeer that ate the mushroom because the compounds pass through mostly intact. Reindeer are out here recycling drugs in the snow. If animals are doing this without language, without culture, without anyone teaching them, then the pull toward altering your mind isn't a modern invention, it's ancient. It might even be older than humans themselves. Which brings us back to the campfire, and to a version of this story that almost never gets told: smoking as medicine. Long before smoke was recreational, long before it carried any spiritual weight, it may have simply been treatment. One of the oldest medical documents ever discovered, the Ebers Papyrus from ancient Egypt, dated to around 1550 BCE, describes using inhaled smoke from heated herbs specifically to treat problems with the throat and lungs. Stop and actually think about that for a second. Ancient Egyptian doctors were treating lung problems with smoke.
That sounds almost backwards by modern standards, but some of the herbs they used genuinely do have effects when inhaled, and delivering medicine through the lungs isn't actually a strange idea. We still do it today, just with inhalers and nebulizers instead of burning herbs in a room. The ancient Greeks did something similar. Hippocrates himself, the man doctors still take an oath named after, wrote about using inhaled herbal vapors to treat lung conditions. And in India, an Ayurvedic practice called Dhumapana, which literally translates to smoke drinking, described detailed, structured methods of inhaling specific herbs through pipes to treat specific conditions. This wasn't guesswork, it was a refined medical system, built and adjusted over centuries. Across ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient India, and ancient China, in cultures that had almost no contact with each other, the same basic idea kept showing up independently. Breathe in smoke, treat the body. That's not a coincidence. That's multiple groups of humans arriving at the same conclusion because, at least some of the time, it actually worked. But medicine wasn't the only reason smoke mattered. There was something else going on, something that had less to do with the body and more to do with the group. Humans evolved as deeply social animals. For most of our history, being alone wasn't just lonely, it was dangerous. Isolated individuals died more often. Groups that trusted each other, that moved and acted together, survived. And it turns out that shared, intense experiences are one of the strongest tools a group has for building that kind of trust. When a group of people sit together, breathing in the same smoke, entering the same altered state at the same time, something happens that's hard to recreate any other way. Modern neuroscience actually backs this up. Shared rituals like this can sync people's brain activity, increase feelings of trust, and strengthen a group's sense of identity, all in ways researchers can now measure directly. So when a single smoke-filled shelter sat crammed with people, sharing whatever they were burning that night, that wasn't just a party, it wasn't just recreation, it was social glue. It was the kind of bonding that let a group walk into danger together and trust that everyone would come back. That single smoke-filled circle, repeated across thousands of generations, in dozens of different regions, using dozens of different plants, might be one of the oldest forms of human connection we've ever had.
But then something changed, and this is the part of the story that turns uncomfortable fast. For thousands of years, in cultures across the Americas, tobacco wasn't casual, it was sacred. When European explorers first arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, Columbus himself wrote about seeing local people walking around with small glowing sticks, inhaling smoke and releasing it slowly through their nose and mouth. His crew was confused. Then, within weeks, his crew tried it too. Of course they did. But for the people who had been using tobacco for generations before that moment, it wasn't a habit. It was medicine, ceremony, and communication with the spirit world, all wrapped into one. Blowing smoke on someone wasn't rude or careless, it was a blessing. Smoke itself was treated like a living messenger, something that carried prayers upward and brought guidance back down. That's why its use was so controlled, so ritualized in so many indigenous cultures. When something is sacred, you don't waste it. You don't reach for it out of boredom. You treat it with respect. The idea of smoking as something casual, something you do on a break or out of habit while staring at a screen, isn't ancient at all. It's a European invention, and a fairly recent one. When tobacco crossed the Atlantic into Europe in the 1500s, it spread with a speed that should sound familiar to anyone watching how trends move today. Within a few decades, it went from an exotic curiosity to a continent-wide obsession. By the 1600s, it was a global trade good. By the 1700s, snuff was fashionable among European aristocracy. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. And by the early 1900s, the machine-rolled cigarette had arrived, making tobacco cheaper, faster to consume, and far more addictive than anything that came before it. What indigenous cultures in the Americas had spent thousands of years turning into a careful, respected ritual practice, European industry compressed into a mass-market product in under 400 years. And it didn't stop there. Through the 20th century, the tobacco industry spent decades and billions of dollars hiding internal research that proved cigarettes caused cancer. They marketed directly to children. They paid doctors to publicly endorse their products. They engineered cigarettes specifically to deliver nicotine faster and harder, maximizing addiction on purpose. A shaman placing cannabis on heated stones during a burial ceremony, and a tobacco executive signing off on advertising aimed at teenagers, both technically worked with smoke. That is almost the only thing they had in common. So when did ancient humans actually start smoking? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly, and we probably never will know for certain. What we do know is that the physical evidence takes us back at least 12,000 years, and the underlying human behavior behind it, the pull toward altering your mind, toward sharing that experience with others, toward using smoke as medicine long before anyone understood why it worked, is almost certainly far older than any artifact we've managed to dig up. It may be as old as fire itself. It may be tied to the exact moment our ancestors developed the ability to connect cause and effect, to sit by a fire, notice how they felt, and think, that felt different last time. Let's do that again. That instinct isn't addiction. That's intelligence. That's the beginning of experimentation. What is clear is this. By the time any civilization on Earth started writing things down, in every region we've studied, people were already finding ways to put smoke into their bodies on purpose. The specific plants changed. The rituals changed. The reasons changed. Medicine, ceremony, bonding, curiosity. But the underlying behavior was already old by the time anyone thought to record it. There's something strangely grounding about that. With everything that separates us from our ancestors, the technology, the medicine, the constant scroll of information we consume every single day, there's this one thin thread that runs, unbroken, through more than 100,000 years of human history. Fire, smoke, breath. The earliest humans sat by fires and breathed in the exact same kind of smoky air you'd smell tonight at any backyard bonfire. At some point, some of them started paying attention to how that smoke made them feel, and then they started choosing it. And then, without writing a single word down, they passed that choice on, generation after generation, until it reached the Scythians howling with pleasure in their heated tents, the Egyptian doctors prescribing smoke for damaged lungs, and the indigenous healers of the Americas treating smoke as a living bridge between worlds. So the next time you flip a light switch, or sit around a fire on a cold night, or catch the smell of wood smoke drifting past you somewhere outside, you're brushing up against something far older than you probably realized. You're doing what humans have always done.